Welcome back to the Indian Wisdom Podcast with your host, Dr. Raj Balkaran. More importantly, today I have a very special guest indeed, a seasoned yogini named Jen Goetchius, who is the author of a superb yoga teacher training manual available on Amazon. Here you go. There's a visual for those of you who happen to be watching on YouTube. There's a link in the podcast notes below. And the subtitle is A Guide from Asana, Pranayama to All Limbs of Yoga. And the subtitle itself bespeaks the significance of this as a resource for those of you who might be scrambling to develop a resource that is more than asana. Um, Jen Goetchius, she runs Ashtanga Hub, which is located in sort of the greater Cleveland, Ohio area. And it just so happens that she had me out a short week ago. It feels like a lifetime ago. A week ago, and I got to speak at our YTT. A lovely, beautiful, very deep program. And so, Jen, welcome to the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So, tell us about this process. Tell us about putting this together, and sort of what were some of your aims, in thinking about a YGT resource.
Yeah, the yoga teacher training manual really came from inspiration from working on other small pocketbooks, chanting pocketbooks, and seeing how some of my friends were quickly producing recipe books, other yoga resources, and how fast and how creative that they could be, pulling imagery, pulling in audio. And I think having going through my own yoga teacher training and seeing the gaps in anatomy, large gaps in physiology and philosophy, I thought, what if I could create my own? What if it was like a buffet and I can pick resources and craft them into a traditional book that can be used with worksheets, with frameworks? Because typically, when students are going through a yoga teacher training program, you get a 2 inch or 3 inch thick fingering binder, and it doesn't fit on your bookshelf. So thinking through, some options, that was really the inspiration of how we can bring all these ancient wisdom, these teachings, the chants, the imagery for the modern day yogi into a typical book. And, not all of them have the indices, but with all of the frameworks and labelings, it really was designed to be a guidebook or a companion book as the students were learning along the way.
I think one of the important things you mentioned at the outset was gaps, and for some years now, perhaps even decades, yoga has both been taking hold in Western culture and the Western imaginary as extended exercise, as postures, as what I think of as small Y yoga, which is modern parlance yoga. We're going to yoga class means we're going to stretch and breathe and feel good. And this process of sort of the dissemination of small Y yoga has been happening in tandem, even for decades now, with a disambiguation in the West, trying to understand yoga in its roots as a path to spiritual awakening, and trying to understand postures as one of eight limbs, at least in the Ashtanga path. And I think we're at a point, I think my public teaching began in 2010, and I was so keen on and sort of helping folks understand that yoga was much more than postures. Now, in my old age, I realized that yoga is postures in modern English. Like, we have the word hors d'oeuvre, right? I'm sure there are certain things we call hors d'oeuvres, like pigs in a blanket, that would make, certain French culinary experts, throw up in their mouth a little bit, but they're called hors d'oeuvres in English, right? Here, have some wieners, sliced wieners. These are hors d'oeuvres. But yoga is very much has been not, you could say, appropriated, or at very least it's been assimilated as kind of intriguing relaxful postures. And I think for a lot of people that's wonderful, and maybe for some of those people that's a gateway drug to what yoga really is. And more and more and more, I mean, at this point, although a minority, the numbers of yoga are so great that that minority looking for the more is a massive number of people on the planet. I know because without targeting anything yoga proper, yoga teachers show up at the Indian Wisdom School saying, "Hey, Let's learn about koshas. Let's learn about the epics. Let's learn about all of the layers of culture that the soil that the banyan of yoga is sort of drawing from. And I always find it very, very heartwarming and fascinating to have figures such as yourself who are very much interested in the more, and you're trying to bring the more into the modern world and into your modern Western circumstance. Could you tell us a little bit about that more in your context and in your studio, in your YTT? Do people come in at various levels of understanding, or what's that like introducing them to that more?
Yeah, I think the opening to this book and even the opening to my heart is you are a seeker, exclamation mark. I think it's sad and fascinating at the same time, that yoga's been sexualized, bastardized, commercialized. And so when we think through or view, at least, from a Western standpoint, I'm generalizing here, not for all, that the Americans are seeing or the Westerners seeing yoga just as asana, just as postures. And once you kind of go through the layers, no pun intended here, the koshas, you do see that there is so much more, even beyond the eight limbs. And so, speaking to those gaps that I had in my own 200 and my own 300 intensive workshops, just very heavy and competitive on the yoga postures or the yoga asanas. And there's no doubt, yes, each lesson is certainly there and unpacked within a posture. There's a breathing element to it, there's an anatomical element to it. There's also a unique spiritual one, whether it's pain and pleasure. But when you're seeking, you know that asana is just the gateway drug, just to kind of get you on the mat. And then once you start going beyond that, we call them these silly postures, but they're not. The ancient texts really talked about them and feeling them, this bhavana, this experience that we can have at a subtle layer. I think that can certainly be experienced during chanting mantras. I think that can be experienced when integrating Ayurveda in your cooking and you're feeling that into your own food and your own recipes. I think that can be experienced in meditation. So when we see or view on social media or typical books or on TV that yoga equals asana, that's just simply not true. And once you start to seek and dive deeper, the layers of more just start to unpack and unfold beyond these physical layers for sure.
Yeah, I like the word that you use in passing, bhavana, which is the word in my mind that comes to mind with postures because people sometimes they're intrigued or they might be even stymied by the notion that, for example, narrative stories, mythological narratives might be related to postures. And of course, more often than not, their namesakes are mythic characters or figures or moments, mythic moments. And the whole idea is that, the narrative, much like the posture, it encodes a bhavana, a mode, a mood, a mindset, an experience. That experience, we human beings can't sort of fully separate our anamaya kosha experience from our manomaya kosha experience, right? If you spend 3 days in bed because of a physical ailment, there's no question that'll impact your pranic body. It'll impact your mental body. It'll impact you'll be lucky to be connecting with your bliss body. But
That's what training is for, right? Fellowshipping.
yeah, yeah. I find it utterly fascinating. So sort of to give the audience a little bit of context of our encounter. It's been relatively short-lived, mine and Jen's, but it's been so far quite rich. Do you want to see a little bit about our interactions thus far? Because I think it's exactly on point in conveying the the transformation afoot among the spiritual yoga seekers in the West, and how different it is from the critical mass of what yoga is in the West. But ironically, it's harkening back to sort of perhaps what is the purpose of yoga, which is personal transformation. So we've had relatively brief, but I'd say very impactful interactions, and maybe you can share a little bit about that because you were an
Yeah,
impetus of it.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because they say, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I never really believed that. I thought, it's just a quote, right? What? And I went all the way to India. I went all the way to Karnataka. And a student of yours, actually, Laura from the Banff, Calgary area was there. I don't have
She's
any
lovely.
dosa. She says, oh, so you're here because of the yogic studies platform. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we're all reading, we're all chanting. But, there's this one gentleman, Dr. Raj. He does great mythology. So what's so great about him? Another person, another PhD doing mythology. No, you should
Who
hear
cares?
his behavior. You should hear how he articulates. And I said, is there a book? Yeah, Mythology of the Poses, the story behind the poses. Check it out. And fast forward, here I am speaking with you. I had never met you until maybe 2 weeks ago in person, and you find this connection to someone truly when you are seeking. And I have felt and experienced that with my own students, my own friends, my own Ashtangi partners and colleagues and yogis. You're on the mat and you start sharing energy with them. And I think people think, why do you get up at 5:30 in the morning to brush your teeth, have some coffee, and be on the mat by 6:30 to share energy, physically, mentally, and spiritually, because we're all going through some really unique traumas and we're unpacking that, but then having again these experiences that do allow you to go deeper. So it's interesting that I had to go all the way to India to not go to Mysore. My intent was to go eventually to Mysore, India, to study with, given the news of this morning, with Sharat, kind of learn more beyond asana. And for me not to go that path and go more of sacred sites and exploring those, to go more into the chanting world, to go more into the philosophy world, that is yoga. That is this whole other plethora of information that is out there that is truly not fully tapped, but it's also not always shared. And I think it's refreshing of how you share some of these deep ancient wisdom, these medicine stories that are either hoarded or not openly shared or only found when the guru and the student come together. And those truly are transformative.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. The stories are so fascinating because, it was the perfect storm of being a newly minted PhD in really a dying field. Religious studies is in some major trouble, and for me, the PhD was, well, it was a blessing for my own spiritual teacher, and it was a means to teach. For me, it was a ticket to teach. It was licensed to teach. I love teaching. I love teaching undergrads as well because they're ripe. They're at a certain age where they're really looking to understand the world more often than not. You have to know how to reach them, though. I don't think everybody really, uh, you know, has that alchemy of, being both loving and accepting and setting some good old boundaries from the outset so they know how well you do is up to you. But I love teaching. And it was the perfect storm of, among my many struggles in this life, finding work has not been among them. I've always had work. I've always worked one and a half jobs. Since I was 13, I was working part time until I finished school, and then on and off. And then everything was dry. There was nothing, not in my academic circles, not in my administrative circles. I finished the PhD rang in 2016 with 4 cents to my name, 4 pennies, couldn't even buy a quarter. And I was like, why has thou forsaken me? My guru had already left Toronto. He was on India. He was in India because he knew he had a little time left before he was going to leave his body. So he went to go wrap up some karmas before leaving this earth. And I thought, what on earth? And then I started entrepreneuring, which at the time I felt like an escort because I had so much baggage around it. And then I realized, no, this is what I meant to do. I meant to be publicly teaching. I was doing continuing studies at the University of Toronto since 2010, but then branching into my own and offering what doesn't exist, giving folks a chance to learn in a certain way that's on the one hand transactional and grounded in deep training, and on the other hand, transformative and grounded in deep training. But on the other hand, it's sort of, there's no, it's prima facie transactional, though it's not really. Where it's, want to take a course, take a course. You want a session, have a session. There's no, if you want to commit deeper, that's up to you. But this is on offer. I mean, everything's on the buffet, and you decide what you want to do with it. Um, but beyond my wildest dreams has been the sorts of karmas that have ripened through the Indian wisdom school. And I realize now that unlike my master Mantriji, all of whose students found their way to Toronto, there'd be a room of 20 of us, and maybe one of us was born in Toronto. It was amazing. Times have changed, and my students are all over the world. And I feel palpable karmas with students all over the world. And sometimes they come to Toronto. Sometimes I create retreat experiences to help them exhaust and learn and grow. But these are different times. And because of the internet, we can exhaust karmas globally in this way. And people find teachers of various stripes. And I find it fascinating that I think Laura directed you to probably the Devi Mahatmya course, if I'm not mistaken. You take this one course, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, I got to bring this guy to
I'm hooked.
Cleveland.
Hey, yeah, yes. I
Um,
think it's
you know,
interesting this notion of commitment, because commitment and devotion is still a hot topic. We joke about having things in moderation in yoga, and it still rings true today. But when you find a teacher, you commit. Especially in Ashtanga, you don't window shop. Same thing with you finding a chanting teacher and learning the lineage, learning the style. And the same thing, I think I look for qualities in students when they want to become a teacher. And many people who buy the training manual, they'll say, I don't want to be a teacher. I'm not ready. I just wanted to do this for personal development, personal transformation. And that's where I was. I did not want to teach. I was so scared in my bones to get in front of a class, and I would shake, and you listen, you feel your heartbeat. And my goal all along when I raised my hand to my teacher, she asked, "What's your why? I go, why are you here? I'm not going to waste everyone's time. Tell me, what's your goals? What's your ikigai? What's your purpose?" I raised my hand nice and slow. I said, "I have insomnia, and I just want to sleep. I want to learn how is it that the body can quickly go to rest and digest? How can I turn on my parasympathetic nervous system and keep it activated so they won't have fragmented sleep?" Oh, you just do yoga. Well, what if I can't touch my toes? That's okay. You just bend your knees. You just do this. You do that. It becomes very structured and scriptive. And I knew that it had to be more than just ingredients of a recipe. There was something deeper there to help me rest. And I think my last flare, now that my son is 10, my daughter's 7, probably my last insomnia flare was probably about 7 years ago. And I don't mean just waking up at 4 in the morning, the Brahma Muhurta and doing our chants. I'm talking true 41, 48 hours of being wide awake and then crashing. And I'll never forget the day that I had been up 16 hours and then crashed. And man, I slept hard and that felt great. And that's when I knew like my body was attacking itself. I was not sleeping properly. And yoga was the way. I know it sounds silly, but learning how to calm my mind and using my body as a way to integrate that, paying attention to my food, my nutrition, my sleep hygiene, my behaviors, everything, really going after the physical layer, then adjusted mindset at the mental layer, which then, it just keeps deeper and deeper, getting frustrated, crying at the computer, yelling at family, and realizing these emotions keep coming up.
hmm,
It's not the physical, it's not the mental, it's all the stuff that's, as I say, the issues are in
it's
the tissues.
the yeah. Well, the way I think of it is the human experience, by and large, it's lived out against the backdrop of the Manamaya Kosha, the story mind,
100%.
emotions, and you know, I've been fortunate enough to have gone through a great deal in this life and have gone through a variety of experiences and transformations and insights and training. And I honestly don't think people would believe all the things that could have been experienced in one life, because if I try and write it down, it'll sound like I'm 10 people. I'm not, I assure you. And I sleep every night. Thank the gods. Um, uh, but the what I've noticed in myself and in a great many yogis, novices, and I've had the good fortune of knowing some highly advanced yogis through my sangha, through my lineage, and elsewhere, there are individuals who have relatively profound spiritual attainment, even siddhis, but they've not worked on themselves. They don't have the personal growth. So they may be great acharyas or occultists or even, given the right day, rishis, but they don't understand themselves, how to relate to other human beings, how to guide people. All of their juvenile baggage is with them because for all of their spiritual acumen, there's been some bypassing. And so
Mhm.
one of the great dictums of my own personal brand of spiritual teaching and experiencing is spiritual growth is not lasting without personal growth and not embodied without personal growth. And the irony is that the other way around, there are those who aren't spiritual at all. The best section of the Oprah Winfrey or Tony Robbins crowd, personal growth will give you spiritual wisdom whether you're looking for it or not. All of a sudden, you have spiritual insights just because you've worked on yourself and you've pacified the monkey mind that is getting in the way of the light. And all of a sudden, you've got so much more light in your mind, in your life, in your purview. and I find it fascinating. But yeah, we all have stuff to
And that
work on, and please,
and that requires work that these things, this stuff, right? These things
why
that are
else is it
down
avoided?
below, right? Exactly. Oh man, we've avoided and buried so much, right? But when we start to unpack it, going back to the commitment, going back to the work, I promised myself 3 years ago I would never buy another self-help book. Never. I can read all day long. If I can speed read it, I can get it on YouTube, I can put it on 2 times speed until you do the work, until you're on your mat sweating, until you're getting your mind focused on a mantra, until you are cool as a cucumber in the
Practice,
grocery line and practicing it. Yes,
practice. Sadhana, sadhana.
that's when the spiritual growth
I
comes.
I remember giving, I think it was a course at the University of Toronto. I was at the continuing study school for some time. This must have been around, I don't know, 2014, 2013. I was saying, look, if self-help worked, it wouldn't be a growing industry. And people would get the help they need. Not to say it's bereft of profound insight and benefit, but when you're acting on the intellectual mind, why can humans not understand that people don't vote based on policy? They never do, they never will. Very few people operate on the level of the intellect. The vast majority of people are moved by emotion, and the arbiter of emotion is narrative story. The stories that are told, that we
Mhm.
tell, this is what moves people. The story you tell about yourself to yourself, that is your reality.
In
And
our
so,
training,
so
we talk a lot about our 3 A's. Like, is your reality based on A, awareness? And then as Americans, you go right to action in our belly, the willpower. We should go back, A, awareness, then A in our heart, acceptance, then A in our belly, action. We talk about that. Oh, I'm going to go cold turkey. I'm going to think about this plan. I'm going to go do it. But you haven't accepted how hard it's going to be to stop your addiction or understand the emotions that are coming up. So when we think about our reality, I often help our students go back to awareness. How are you thinking? How are you feeling? Are you accepting it? And then taking action into the steps that you're going to do. Because often the cycles come back. We fall off the bandwagon and then we're right back where we started again.
yeah, that reminds me of the story of Ganesh and Kartikeya, where Kartikeya just jumps into action, and
Yes.
and Ganesha takes a moment to plug into the field and see what's needed. There's two sets of questions. I always ask questions that are open ended. I don't have a particular response in mind, but two sets of questions I'd like to ask, and you can kind of pick and choose your adventure. One question is along the lines of the structure of the YTT training annual, and how might one use it, or who might it be for. And the other question is quite related, and you can answer whichever you like first. And the other is, so you ironically went to India to hear from someone else who was there that, by the way, there is a spiritual teacher dressed up as a dressed up as an entrepreneur, and he's fine doing that because there's plenty of businessmen dressed up in robes. So in the holy city of Toronto, check it out. And then you find what you consider your spiritual teacher, and that's all good and well. Um, and then you invite this guy out to Cleveland just last weekend to do some talks. What was that process like? First of all, who comes to you? Are there certain kinds of people that come to you for training? Is it varied? And what was that process like? I suspect people would be fascinated to learn about your experiences as a teacher, and that, whatever you want to share. So whichever piece of that resonates, you can kind of choose your adventure.
Yeah, the training is held in Avon, which is at Cultivate Yoga. But there's a Lakewood location, and there's an Avon location. And so we just recently have finished everything at the Lakewood location. And so we often say that our anchor is Avon. It's our headquarters because it's a freestanding building. And what's unique is that our board members have transformed this business. Used to be three sisters for profit, and got transformed into a nonprofit called Cultivate Yoga, run by Evan. And so when Evan was going through his yoga teacher training, we realized how expensive a drop-in class could be. In Ohio back then, $14, $17 is average here for the Cleveland. I've seen as high as $30 for a drop-in in Texas, or even more. And that's just dedicated by, or it's indicative of the market. Um, but now every single class, every single day is free. Whether you donate $1 or $10, or you're a warrior and you donate $100 for the month, you can come unlimited. And so the community is self-sustaining, which is great. Workshops will come in, and teachers and other professionals can rent our space. 70-30 split is pretty much an industry standard. And when I had learned about this, trying to help our community, I thought this could be an avenue to help others, help us sustain. And that was also kind of the motivation of, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get all this knowledge out of my head and into a book? And who's going to come? And we're in the middle of Cleveland. We're not in Toronto. We're not in Chicago. We're not in India. Who's going to come to a yoga teacher training in the middle of nowhere by Lake Erie? And little by little, I just started getting questions and views. Of course, there was some structure from the Yoga Alliance, with the school is accredited. There's a curriculum of how many hours you have to put into your techniques and training, how many hours for anatomy, but there were still gaps. And so I had a little bit of creative freedom with the electives to bring in, if I needed to, Ayurveda or some Jyotism. So Fridays are dedicated to philosophy night. Saturdays and Sundays, we go through various lectures with, whether that be anatomy or hands-on assisting, and that continues on Saturday and Sunday. But there are weekend immersions. And it's just fascinating to see that almost 80% of the students so far have been in the healthcare field, nurses, doctors,
Mm.
respiratory therapists. Uh, we have a lot of addicts that are going through AA, which is amazing and incredible, and they all help each other. And mix of women and men, mature, older, young, fresh, new, like all the blood. It just feels so good to help the community.
Beautiful. Quite the mix of people. That's wonderful. So when you have someone like Dr. Raj come in and lecture for them, or whatever that experience is like for them, what's your perspective, but like as running that program and participating in it, knowing those students inside out and watching what happens? What was that like for you? What was your perspective? Sort of part of the reason I asked is because I think it'll perhaps inspire others to engage in similar transformations.
Mhm. Most of the lecturers that come in, the professionals, usually don't hit the floor until maybe the third month, fourth month. It takes time for us to establish trust amongst each other, understand each other's mobilities, understand
Mm.
each other's strengths and weaknesses, their interests. And so, yeah, there's certainly a certain level that our guard is down in those first 2 months. We're getting to know each other, right? We're dating. We haven't gotten married yet. And so when the lecturers come in, we do help the students go through some pre-reads, and they've done a little bit of practice on their chanting. But usually, in your case, and I have with others, it's been surrender. I mean, I've obviously have seen some lecturers articulate their thoughts on their level of professionalism, but knowing people that come in will set the agenda, but I let them have creative freedom. And the students certainly can ask questions, but letting the energy naturally unfold, seeing where the conversations might go, setting the stage as it ties to the philosophy or the topics that they're studying for that month. And then helping them realize, look, these aren't just stories. These aren't just folklore or kindergarten stories. Like, these are tied to the postures. These are tied to your 8 limbs, your yamas and niyamas, how you can be a good householder in the modern day times, how you can be a great healthcare worker and helping other people in your community, because the lessons don't die, right? They can embody them, and helping them realize, okay, this story may be tied to this particular posture, but now you realize if you're struggling in that posture, you don't always have to go down the anatomy route. You can go down another route to unpack the lessons in that pose, or unpack the lessons from a philosophical standpoint, so it can hit your heart and hit your brain, so you can be a better person, a better human for our community. And I think that's amazing when lecturers come in and really touch the hearts of students.
That's lovely. What are some of walk us through the text, or at very least some of the constituents? What were you sure to include as part of your manual?
Yeah, the manual's set up into kind of a basic overview, but it's got these great worksheets in the beginning, starting with their sadhana, and then going into helping them set up really their behavior. So there's worksheets where they can write in Monday through Sunday, and then going a little bit into their sun A's. So really the beginning part is understanding the yoga styles. And then each section, one by one, we go in the order from pranayama, Vayana, we've got some chants, anatomy, philosophy, and the mythology. All the good stuff's in the back. All the mythology and pretty much some additional worksheets, which are good. I think what's unique is that we talk about these things that are very common, and then we make fun of it. For example, like, is it a chakra or a chakra, right? And why? Like, why are we messed up and bastardized the Sanskrit? And are they really just colorful wheels, or are they truly tied to our endocrine system? Perhaps they were visualization centers. How do they tie to these sounds? We see so much misinformation that's represented in different media. And so helping them realize it's more than just a wheel, right? Um, Especially when it comes to things that we talk about samadhi, having bliss. Well, samadhi could also be, leaving your body. We don't talk about it in that way. It's okay that we unpack some of these shadows and these dark things in a safe environment, a safe place where each person can speak openly. And yes, we're reading things here within a book, but having that experience in a much deeper way, I think has helped people realize, man, like I've been such a fool, or man, I really like believe that for surface value. And to hear them say these things to go deeper, um, has been wonderful. I think the fun thing has been the Yoga Sutras. So this really took a lot of time. I think we'll all talk about the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and the four padas. What I did is I have an ebook and I gave them the answers, but I made it all open. So they had to go in and translate. And though many of those answers certainly are on the internet, are in many wonderful philosophy books, ebooks, like I said, but making them write it out has been helpful, and then translating it into a different way. The other thing is we're also singing it. We're trying to work on singing to help with to recite it and to learn it and to memorize it and embody it. Not asking all of them to go really beyond the first four, the typical four ones we know, but that has been good to see. Like, well, I can't always memorize. It's Sanskrit. It's a different language, right? It's not Latin, but it's Sanskrit. And how do I make these sounds? My tongue may not move that way, but when they start to experience it and feel like a group of all the vibration of Om and hear how the sounds reverberate, it's nice to see their eyes and their heart glow.
Yeah, they seem quite susceptible. I think probably to a number of aspects of the teachings when I was there, but they were quite susceptible to the utterance dimension, the chants, and that seemed to be quite impactful for them, which was really cool to see. Lovely.
I think when lectures come in, or particularly in your case, um, you you feel the energy of the story, right? It's very moving. We're crying, we're laughing, we're back to crying again, we're writing notes. And at some point, you just stop writing notes, right? Just stop, put your pen down, and you just begin to hear it and feel it in a different way. And these are things that you don't find on YouTube. You don't find them in a book, right? They're passed down teacher to teacher, the Parampara, right? We're learning them from our gurus, from you, from others. So truly it's not lost. I think people sometimes joke that it's folklore, that's mythology, but it's not. I view it as medicine.
Yeah, I mean, I use the word myth. I mean, in the sort of technical scholarly sense. I mean, depending on how nerdy you want to get in terms of whether you want to think of it as itihasa or narrative literature, but certainly mythology is a sort of a catch-all umbrella. And you know, whether it is Durga slaying the buffalo demon or Moses parting the Red Sea, it's mythology. Now, he might be of a Judeo-Christian background and be offended by one but not by the other, and don't realize the rather privileged asymmetry of your view. So I treat all such stories as mythology. But see, unlike most who dismiss mythology as a child's play at best, right? To my mind, mythological stories, irrespective of whether they're historically true or they're spiritually true, mythological stories are spiritually true. Why do you think Lord of the Rings and Star Wars is crack for Western audiences? Because they can be spiritually fed in a safe way without the dogma and trappings of institution. Mythological stories are the narratives that give us insight into the guts of our existence. And I don't use the term mythology pejoratively at all. Um, But I guess to each her own. But these stories are real. They're powerful. They're real in a certain way. They're more real than the question of whether they're historically true. The question of historical veracity, to my mind, is exactly the wrong question to be asking about these narratives. They're not historically true. They're spiritually true, and therefore eternal. For as long as we're moved by them, they are true.
My
But I'm a
knowledge,
bit
I
of
know there are, to my knowledge, I know there are a lot of experts that are looking at some of these epic stories and trying to astrologically, understand where things were had lined up at that time when they were written a long time ago, or certain geographical points. But if you take that aside for just a moment and unpack, like you said, the lesson that's still in there, regardless of where it took place, who, with whom, more than anything, whether you are a student that is young or old, mature or college student, beginner or advanced, is that each student in their heart identifies with that archetype, right? And so, are you the lover? Are you the warrior? Are you the fighter? Are you the peacekeeper? Each of them can see themselves in that story.
Yeah, it's fascinating, utterly fascinating. What are some trends you've noticed in doing this? Part of why I'm asking this is to sort of at least have a little bit of a case study of one in terms of some trends in the field. But what are you noticing in terms of students and their interests and what's changing? I feel that you are consciously or unconsciously part of a transformation of at least in your niche. And I wonder what you've noticed about that because I have my own suppositions and my own intuitions about where this is headed and why for all of us. But what have you noticed in terms of who shows up and the sort of kind of what might you glean in terms of trends or the future of your teaching?
That's a good question because I see the trends from different perspectives. One's from the teacher side and the student side. I'm not doing it for the money. I think a lot of people think, oh, it's financially, it's great, can help pay the bills. I don't know of one yoga person that is rich financially, right? It takes time to hold space. It takes dedication. Um, books come and go, classes come and go. Um, Yoga is not a way, it's not a means to always pay the bills. Not always. I'm generalizing here, but it's hard. So putting aside the competitive component to it, on the student side, the trends have been interesting, and we have a couple students coming from Dayton, Columbus, coming all the way up from Cleveland, majority because we're in Avon, a suburb of Cleveland. Our students are within, a 50-mile radius. I think the future of just traditional healing, the modalities that can be packed into yoga teacher training are phenomenal. And I think we see that with experts with, we have an expert that will be coming for neuroscience and, behavioral cognition and principles behind that. We have a chiropractic on board helping with biomechanics. We have an expert meditator who's trained in the Himalayan mountains. I mean, now that we see that yoga teacher training can offer healing for modern day people that are stressed out, nutritionally depleted, have many irons in the fire with their families, with their work, with their job, with their other family members, like how are we going to live this balanced life? And these aren't things that were taught in school, let alone college, let alone from other generations of our family. So it's interesting to see that sometimes our family comes from students and we're helping them, and those students help those teachers too. The trends,
Fast,
I mean, it's going to be. We kind of joke that within the Ashtanga community, it might implode upon itself. Um, but putting aside Ashtanga, and yeah, that is my love. I see elements within Jivamukti. I see elements within Iyengar lineage. I mean, all of them have these common threads, certainly, but I would love to see more householders, more students, college kids really take on a level of healing that can come from yoga teacher training, even if they choose not to be a teacher, doing that for personal development because it's filling up their soul. Sometimes Westerners don't like to think about that. Oh, our family's religious. Okay, well, great, because yoga is a science. Our spirituality is beyond religion. This has nothing to do with what religion you are, who you voted for politics. We're talking about how you can live and be a balanced human in your community. And that's where I would like to see the trends of future schools unfolding and unpacking that for their students.
Beautiful. That is beautiful, and that is a lovely note to end on. But let me give you an opportunity. Is there anything else that you want to say or comment on before we close for today? Of course, the
Shanga
conversation's
Hub,
just begun, but but
yeah, we're just starting. Yeah, Shanga Hub will have their 300-hour training in August of 2025. And I also create a Hanuman Chalisa book. So it's more of a pocket book that has translations in there too to help students learn along the way. And I'm always just open to having conversations about yoga. I'm sure my family says, is there anything else you talk about other than yoga? Do you just eat, sleep, and talk yoga? Yes, because we
well,
love it.
well, considering yoga proper is related to everything, I suppose that makes sense. Great. Well, thank you very much for appearing on the podcast today.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. For those listening, once again, we've been speaking with Jen Goetchius, who runs Ashtanga Hub out by the Cleveland area, in a tiny town, west side of Cleveland called Avon. It shows us the site in Lakewood. We have links to her YTT and her resources, especially this YTT training manual in the podcast notes. Until next time, keep well, keep listening, and keep contemplating the future of yoga. Take care. Namaste.